Hey everybody, welcome to the third episode of the Jagged Iron podcast. This is Nick, your host. I'm here today with Abby Rosmarin, who is a author, tai-chi instructor, yoga instructor, and also kickboxer. She has 2 books out. She's been doing yoga for about 5 years.
That's correct.
Tai chi for
about 7.
About Jesus Christ, and kickboxing for
2.
She trains people out of New Hampshire.
That's right, all over the place.
And let's start off with what exactly is Tai Chi for most. I feel like most people think it's just kind of like a silly dance.
Basically, when I ask people if they know what Tai Chi is, they either have this image of like this old guy in the park waving his hands around, or they have absolutely no clue what I'm talking about. Tai Chi is fascinating because Tai Chi itself is actually a philosophy. It means supreme ultimate. It's this idea of this greater collective, this greater being, and from that, a martial art was more or less created that combined philosophy and physicality. It is a martial art. It's an internal martial art. Which is different than most other martial arts, which are usually external. The idea is that the energy comes from within, and also you're practicing the moves not in, say, rapid-fire succession, but usually very slow, very methodical, usually in a form that you repeat over and over and over again. And so the idea is, it is a martial art. You can use it for self-defense or to do competitive fighting. The only thing is you would then speed it up. And you do it as slowly as you do, not only to become really intricate, really precise. You get the muscle memory to have your hand go to the exact spot you want it to go. But it's a mindset thing. You learn that, martial arts equals calm mindset. So hopefully when you have to do those moves, you have that calm mindset as well.
What's a little bit of the history of it?
The history of it is really fascinating because there's all this mysticism behind Tai Chi because the philosophy itself is thousands of years old. The martial art aspect is only about 200 or so years old, and it was originally just called Chen style, Chen style martial art. It was from the Chen village. They created this martial art that they all practiced. There's this wonderful legend of this person infiltrating the village and learning it secretly and then going off to win this great competition.
There always is.
And that's a really cool story. I mean, the reality is there was a man who worked alongside people who were from the village, and he saw those people practicing the martial art, and he really wanted to learn it. And those people said, "Hey, you know what? Why don't you go to my village? This is my father. He's the one who trains people. He's the one who teaches people. You can learn from him." And that's kind of where it came from, where the main style that people know the most, the Yang style Tai Chi, came from that guy going to the Chen village, learning the martial art, kind of adapting his own variation of it. And then it kind of spread out from there. There's 5 internationally known styles, and then a gazillion other offshoots. Like I remember hearing one of my friends taking Tai Chi in Derry, New Hampshire, and it was called Dong style or something like that, which made me laugh just the name of it. But okay, and it really has evolved into this crazy. This really varied force that can change depending on the style, the person, the teacher, all sorts of stuff.
So how does a white girl from New Hampshire go about doing this for 7 years?
Well, I have to say it was a little bit of pure luck. It was something my husband and I were looking into doing. We both are interested in martial arts. I had a really, sordid history when it came to martial arts. I would try a martial art, quit it, try it again, quit it again, and we were like, oh, maybe we should try Tai Chi. And it just so happened that our gym at the apartment complex we were living at, somebody who was born, raised, trained in Tai Chi in China was also living there. She was also using the gym. And there was one day where she was at the gym wearing the t-shirt of a particular dojo in the area. And my husband saw it and was like, oh, is that place any good? And she's like, oh, I actually teach there. And he found out that she taught Tai Chi, and it kind of evolved from there. We started taking classes from her, and it became it just almost blew up. It went from this like casual thing of, oh, Wednesday nights we'll go and learn some Tai Chi, to like this very individualized one-on-one instruction. My own instructor, her name is Chow, would look to me and basically be like, okay, well, when you teach, you're going to, this is how you can explain it. Like, she was basically grooming me to be a teacher long before I would be ready to be a teacher. But really the faith that she had in me, even as I was getting as frustrated as I was with the form and with learning everything, really propelled me to actually stick with this martial art, not quit it like I quit everything else, and develop what I needed to develop to become an instructor and have it become what it is today for me.
So you talked about an internal martial art. Can you explain and kind of broaden that a little bit? What do you mean by that?
Oh yeah, it's basically the same idea of introversion versus extroversion. It's where you get your energy from. External martial arts, the idea is you take the energy around you to, do whatever you have to do to your opponent. You meet your opponent head on, you use the outside force to overcome the opponent. With an internal martial art, the idea is the energy comes from within. It's got a very physiological base where everything starts in the center. Everything starts from within. And I mean, you see that in external martial arts as well. You leverage your punches. You start everything out from the core. But there's just this extra emphasis in Tai Chi that it's not just about, from the core out, leveraging what you need to leverage, but there's an energy source at the center of you that you are drawing from to find your power.
And it's mostly forms, correct? There's not a lot of sparring or any kind of combat?
Usually there isn't. More often than not, it's a practice of form. There is Tai Chi sparring. It's very hard to find videos of that, because usually if you Google Tai Chi sparring, you get all the funny videos of people really slowly punching each other. But to watch it is incredible. It's so precise and so fast-paced. Sometimes people do what are called push hands, which is kind of a type of sparring where you essentially stand in front of the person, you put your hands next to their hands, and the idea is you're using their own momentum to knock them over. So basically you're there holding hands, seeing if you can push the other person over. But yeah, primarily it is, practicing forms kind of over and over again, letting it become really meditative and, getting peace of mind.
Is there competition involved?
There usually is. People can do Tai Chi and just have that be something that, just brings whatever fulfillment they need in their life, but there are a lot of competitions where you can basically more or less practice show the form off, and you get judged on how precise you are and so on. I do believe they will have competition sparring as well. But yeah, there is that element of competition for Tai Chi, if you want to go down that route. Do
you choose to go down that route?
I have not. I've thought about it, especially given how much encouragement my own instructor had when it came for me to be teaching, competing, all that stuff. But every time I think about it, I get super nervous and super anxious, and I figure unless my mindset can shift, I think it's best to keep it as something that I practice and something I teach, not something I'm trying to perfect so I can, wow a judge.
I really like the idea of you running into your Tai Chi instructor in her little Tai Chi suit in the middle of an apartment complex gym. That sounds like it was probably pretty fantastic. When you were younger, did you do athletics, or is this kind of your first dive into athleticism?
Yes and no. It's I ran track in high school. Being the super tall girl I was, the track people loved me. They wanted me for the high jump and the hurdles and all that stuff. But that was really all I did with the athletic side. I loved running, but never could get into anything else in terms of the sporting world. I really would try something out and feel gangly and awkward and quit it, both with martial arts and really any other type of sport. Just my mindset was not where it needed to be. It really took until my college years to really step out of my comfort zone and actually try something for longer than 2 months.
Did you run? So did you run at like a high level, or was it more just kind of messing around?
It was basically messing around. I never graduated past junior varsity, which is a little bit of a sting, especially given how I was the tallest girl on the team. So you would think, oh, at least she's going to hit varsity hurdles. Never did, and it was definitely a mindset thing. I just assumed I wasn't all that good and never tried for anything higher. So it was really casual running.
Has Tai Chi helped at all with your confidence level?
Oh, big time. I'd say Tai Chi is kind of my dividing line between who I was beforehand, which, really just terrible mindset, low self-esteem. I'm awkward, I can't do anything, I'm uncoordinated, to what I am now, which, is somebody who posts yoga selfies on Instagram of, look at this crazy pose I can do, look at my level of physicality.
So have you noticed a lot of carryover into yoga you started Tai Chi first, right? By 2 years?
Yep, that's correct. There's a lot of carryover. I mean, the sheer fact that even yoga was a philosophy for thousands of years before it became the physical practice that it is today. There's a lot of carryover, especially with mindset as well. Yoga's a little bit different. Yoga's more about, tuning into the body, listening to what works. Whereas Tai Chi, it's more like, well, here's the form, and if you blow out your knee, well, that's kind of on you for having a blown out, crappy knee in the first place. But it really is. There's a lot of overlap, a lot of sense of empowerment too that can come from both of them.
You say it was a philosophy before it was kind of a physical thing. What does that mean? What was the philosophy?
Well, it's...
Keep in mind, only my parents listen to this, so don't be nervous.
It's all good. It's, it's a very vast network of ideas. Like, yoga means to unite. And in some ways, it's very similar to Tai Chi with this idea of the higher power, the collective force, and getting a way to connect with that higher force, uniting the mind, body, and spirit. Beforehand, it was all these different ways you could meditate, so you could become higher than the fluctuations of the mind, fluctuations of the body, transcend the physical realm into a more spiritual realm. And then we got the physical stuff, which was, okay, now you can do movements that might help prepare you to meditate so you can transcend the physical realm. And now, especially for people like me, I see the physical part as a meditation in and of itself. It's not preparing ourselves to meditate, it is meditation.
So it wasn't invented by soccer moms?
It was not invented by soccer moms. It was actually invented about 200 or so years ago, and this is one of my favorite things to point out for people who get a little too hyper-purist about yoga. The stuff that we consider super-duper classical, like this is yoga, and if you don't do it like this, your chakras are never going to be clean. I
think they saw a kid at Rite Aid for that, though.
I think so, I'll too. That was invented 200 years ago by a man named Krishnamacharya, and ironically enough, he took the physical, like his inspiration for the physical poses came from things like Danish wrestling, English gymnastics, very Western ideas, because he was watching these Europeans come into these Indian gyms and work out, and their level of physicality was attracting other people to, I want to try out Danish wrestling and English gymnastics. And so, almost as a way of national pride, he was like, no, here's this wonderful exercise that you guys can do, and it ties in our Indian philosophy and our Indian heritage. And ironically enough, people looked to it and said, that's not yoga. What are you doing? Doing all this physical stuff and your chaturangas and your sun salutation. That's not yoga. And I love pointing that out because people love to turn to modern variations of yoga and be like, oh, that's not yoga. Wait a minute, you're not putting your foot down at exactly 45 degrees? That's not yoga. It's like you're saying verbatim what someone told the father of modern yoga. You're basically saying that exact same thing, so chill out.
So what was it before that?
It was basically various styles of sitting to meditate. The term asana, which you hear everywhere in yoga, it's plastered onto the end of any Sanskrit term. It originally just meant seat. It was all these different ways you could sit and meditate and, focus on your breath and, be bigger than your caveman mind. And it was quite literally sedentary.
Oh, that's interesting. So then the kind of the physical aspect came along afterward, and it helped you reach kind of the higher levels of the original. Is that the kind of the idea?
Basically, I think for a lot of people, we do have to tire out the body before we can even think about, quieting down the mind and being still. And I think there's also something to be said about the moving meditation. If you can link up your breath as you're moving, if you can, actually kind of tune into the body, and if something hurts, you're not going, oh man, I'm so weak. Why can't I do this? But going, oh, that doesn't work for my body right now. Let me ease out and do something that does. Like, you're setting the groundwork to get above that caveman mind, which will do things like judge you because, you can't touch your toes, or freak out because your mind is bouncing around. You're supposed to be quiet right now.
I think anyone who's ever taken a yoga class probably realizes that it's a lot harder than it looks.
That is correct. Especially people who take some of the more physical versions. There's Ashtanga yoga, which anyone who ever thinks yoga is super duper easy, go take a primary series class in an Ashtanga studio. It will kick your butt.
I know. I've taken classes, and it's like I'm like a big fat guy in the back struggling, and then I look up front, and there's like old women and soccer moms and skinny guys with no shirts on doing all this crazy shit, and I'm back there, and it just must sound like there's a hippopotamus in the back of the room. Like, I always feel like they're probably afraid or something of what's going on behind them. Sounds like someone's dying.
You're just perfecting hippopotamus asana.
And they always try to make you come up to the front of the class.
Yeah.
They say if you struggle, you should be closer to the front.
Yeah, I mean...
That's bullshit. Don't ever do that to anybody.
Well, I mean, I see it both ways. As an instructor, for me, I like it when the newer students are within eye range, so I can make sure they're not doing something crazy. And I'm one of those instructors where I never want to single anyone out. It's tough enough to be trying something new. You don't want someone going, hey, you on the blue mat, you're doing it wrong. Like, no one wants that. So I might, like, if I could see them, I can give certain cues that would keep them from, say, blowing out their knee. But at the same time, I totally get it. The first time I took a yoga class, I was in the back. I was worried about, I approached it almost like, will I pass the test? Will I make the team? Very runner's mindset when it came to yoga. So I totally get it. Like, I would never tell a new student, come to the front, let me look at you.
How long did it take for you to kind of get out of the mindset of this is a competition? I think for a lot of people, especially like in America and that kind of thing, everything is so competition driven that it must be really hard to get out of that mindset to kind of realize it's just about you and not about what everybody else is doing.
It took a while, to be honest. When I was in teacher training, so getting ready to teach yoga, I still had that mindset, and it's really hard to get out of that. It was years and years of yoga, years and years of forcing myself past my means, and then waking up the next morning with a strain in one of my hamstrings, or my shoulders would really hurt, or I would have jammed up my lower back, and it was purely because I had this ego attitude of I've got to achieve the pose, I've got to, I got to be the best yoga student. That was really the toughest hurdle when I realized my level of physicality was high enough that it was higher than average. So of course I'm looking around to the average people going, all right, I got this. Look at how well I can touch my toes, and I touch my toes better than you. It took a really long time to get over that and drop the ego and be like, who cares? Like, we're here to better our bodies. Who gives a shit if I'm touching my toes better than the person next to me?
That's what a lot of people, especially in weightlifting, where it's always a single one-on-one sport, like powerlifting or Olympic lifting. Yeah, you're competing against everybody, but it's a good day if you can go out and set a record for yourself. If you can get your own personal record, as opposed to going out and trying to beat everybody. I mean, there's always going to be guys, in the top 10 who you're never going to beat. It's just not going to happen. They have the drive and the genetics, and they have everything in the right place, and they're just out there crushing it. And you're never going to touch them. And that kind of veers a lot of people away. And I think I kind of I used to have that kind of mindset where it's like, well, what's the point if you can't be the best at it? There's no point in even going out if you're not going to be the best at it. And I always had that kind of mindset in everything I did in boxing and kickboxing and jiu-jitsu. In lifting, it was almost like if you can't be the absolute best, that there's no point. And I think it takes a long time for people to realize that you don't have to be the best. Sometimes you can just do your best.
Exactly.
And that's more important than anything you're going to get.
Exactly.
Little plastic trophy is nothing.
Exactly. And there are no trophies in yoga. As I like to tell my students, you don't find enlightenment just because you can hop into a handstand. And that's the thing. There's always going to be something you could add on. Like, there are some really crazy, like, YouTube videos of these people, like, essentially floating there. That's what they're doing. They're not even getting into the poses. They're floating into them. Super advanced. Like, there's always going to be something that's going to be just outside of your element, no matter how physical you are. So it's really not about, can I be the best? Because you're not. That's plain and simple. Can you do what actually works and improve yourself?
What do you think has had a bigger impact on you, yoga or tai chi?
Ooh, I think
asking the hard questions.
I know the hard questions, man, heavy hitter. Well, it's fascinating because I'd say yoga was or tai chi was the most effective in terms of a concentrated dose of get your head out of your butt. Like, in terms of what forced me to stop being the person I was as a teenager and in college, what was Tai Chi? That really just was the kick in the pants I needed. In terms of a slow burn that has probably had the most effect, it's definitely yoga. It took a lot longer. Tai Chi, it was, basically this, chemical explosion, kaboom, now you're changed. Yoga, it was years and years and years. But over the long run, I've changed more through yoga than I have through Tai Chi.
If you had found yoga first, do you think that would have been the catalyst that turned you into the person you are, or do you think that it would have been the same way?
It might have been the same way, if only the way I approached the classes. And I mean, it's very hard to see how I would have approached yoga differently if I had not had a couple years of Tai Chi under my belt. But the way I was with yoga, I was really self-conscious and looking around and comparing and putting value judgments on how I looked.
And everybody else.
And
who are you kidding?
Else. Which I'd like to think that super judgy foundation is why I can be as universal as I am as an instructor, because I look back on that and I'm disgusted that I was that way, and so anything I can do to not be that person again, I'm going to do it. But
I'm still totally that way.
Especially in the yoga class.
Especially in the yoga class.
Look around and be like, nobody else has this hippopotamus asana the way I do. Look at all the sweat I'm doing. I am the king of
that
sweat.
That fat
master.
guy is sweating way more than this fat guy. That's how I look at it. I'm sweating way less than that fat guy.
That sweat is liquid.
Of course,
gold.
I'm always looking in the mirror, so it's never a plus.
That's always awkward. At least I'm doing better than that guy. Oh wait, I'm looking in the mirror. But when it came to Tai Chi, it was almost traumatic how I was in the class, because I would get really frustrated. And it would be the same frustrations that caused me to quit every other martial art I had tried. It was just pure luck that, I had basically the support system of doing it alongside my husband, the support system of an instructor who saw something in me, and the fact that everything was really, really slow, so that helps. But I would get so frustrated and so upset that I couldn't get the pose all at once. I felt awkward, and I would, honest to God, be in class biting my lower lip, trying not to cry. And it really was. It was like this trial by fire to get my head out of my butt. Because you're surrounded.
And for the listener, she has a very big head.
It's really awkward, too. It also made going to the mall really weird with my head up my butt. How are you supposed to see anything?
She had very strange chairs at that time. Driving was a bitch.
Right? Still don't know how I got my license or even how they took my picture. But it really was at a certain point it was I can't cry in front of all these people. This is ridiculous. And that took a while. I probably was in Tai Chi for a solid year before I stopped getting so frustrated that I wanted to cry over it. And I just think about how, it was this almost traumatic reawakening of, stop being an idiot, versus the yoga, which was a much more gentle, hey, you're being an asshat, stop it.
So a lot of athletes now are doing kind of yoga as a recommended, almost like ballet was back, especially football players, MMA fighters. Ballet in the 80s, kind of everybody was doing it and trying it, 80s and maybe 90s, I'm not even sure.
So.
But it was kind of a big deal that people were doing it and trying to learn how to move their bodies differently, and yoga is kind of becoming that now. Have you noticed more athletes or athletic people in your classes in the last maybe 5-6 years?
Oh yeah, I definitely have. And I mean, I know even for myself, some of my clients have been people like training for the Boston Marathon, or people who are not necessarily in a league where they'll get paid, but are people who are very active in certain sports leagues, like hockey leagues. And it's amazing balance, because you need that. You have this sport that you're training for that basically says do whatever you need to do to achieve the end result. Which isn't healthy. Anyone who studies sports psychology can tell you that the number one thing you want to program out of athletes is to get rid of that hyper emphasis on the product, the end result. You want to get them to focus on the process, because otherwise they're going to be so focused on the product, they're going to, freak out. They're going to be discouraged, disheartened. They're going to potentially cheat and do PEDs and all that stuff. But if you can get them to focus on the process, they might be a little more diligent about training and all that stuff. And yoga's huge to help reprogram that. Like, it's not even just we're helping you stretch where otherwise you're just building strength. It is we're helping you get the mindset you need here by essentially doing this wonderful bubble world of do what feels good, your appropriate edge, your appropriate set level of challenge. So you can take that, and you can take that proprioception, that body awareness that you're gaining, and then go to your training and be like, okay, I do have to work really hard and I have to push myself to the limit. But I can recognize when I'm pushing myself to the limit and I'm pushing myself past the limit and something's going to snap.
What's a typical training week look like for you?
Well, my ideal training week, and I would like this to be my typical one, it was for a while and then it wavers, is where I'm doing, yoga of some form every single day. And right now I've got that down pat, especially demoing the poses for my students. In some ways I'm getting yoga in sometimes upwards of like 2-3 hours a day. Doing at least kickboxing or boxing.
3 hours of yoga a day?
More or less. If I'm teaching, say an hour 15 class or 3 of those in one day, there's a lot of demoing I do, because people are very visual. They prefer to see what they're supposed to be doing as opposed to verbal. And even then, even if I'm only doing the super modified versions, which I most frequently do when I'm demoing, because if I go into what I can naturally do, someone's going to blow out their spine.
No bragging or anything.
No bragging.
But just saying, I'm pretty amazing.
I'm amazing.
Way
at
above
yoga,
these peasants.
Right? These peasants can't do what I do. But it is true. Even just like the smaller things, where something that just not even my level of physicality, mobility, just my body type would be better able to get into a certain pose. If I get into it fully and someone who doesn't have that same body type tries to do it, all of a sudden they're hunching their backs, they're basically hurting their knees. So I'd much rather show the gentler versions and then be like, oh, and here's these other things you could do. But, some type of yoga every single day. I prefer to take class, because taking class versus teaching it are two separate things. When you're taking the class, you can just be all about yourself. Teaching it, you're all about everybody else. And it's energetically a completely different experience. Then at least doing 1 or 2 classes of boxing or kickboxing, ideally 2. Life gets in the way, and so it's, especially these days, it's more like 1 a week. Trying to get some type of running in at least twice a week. And then on top of that, doing my circus arts, doing things like aerial silks at least once a week, which I have learned when it comes to strength building, that is my thing. Like I'm terrible at lifting weights. I'm terrible at doing any of that type of strength training. But
when was the last time you tried?
Well, it's been a while, I must admit. I used to actually do a little bit of strength training, if only to provide balance, because yoga can give you extremely strong triceps but very weak biceps, and you don't need to know too much about anatomy to know if you've got super duper strong triceps and super duper weak biceps, you could probably pull your bicep accidentally.
Every bro listening to this just paused and is now doing curls.
There we go.
You've done enough.
Excellent. I actually have a very sad, well, it's funny and it's sad at the same time, story of how I learned why, before I was doing something like silks for strength training, that I had to do something to balance things out. Because for a while I had the, really, really strong shoulders, really, really strong triceps, super weak biceps. There's really nothing in yoga where you're engaging your biceps. And I was warned by anyone who knew anything about anatomy, hey, you need balance. If you've got one muscle side that's stronger than the other muscle side, you're going to pull something. And this is how I found out this could be the case. So, in Family Guy, the bird is the word dance? So, that we have that video up, and, all of us, my friends, my husband and I were watching the bird is the word dance, and I'm doing the bird is the word dance, which you swing your arms around. And at one point, I must have swung my arm down a little bit too much because it straightened my elbow, or, it straightened my arm, my elbow locked, my tricep contracted super duper strong, my bicep was like, what? And I pulled my bicep over that. And to this day, I'm like, what a way to injure yourself. I hurt myself with the bird is the word dance. Like, wow.
No one ever gets hurt competing in their own sport. Everybody, I knew a kickboxer named, I think his name was Devin. But anyways, he had kickboxed for years, and he stopped and started playing flag football instead, and he broke his nose like a week and a half in. He had gone 10 years without injuring himself in boxing, and then broke his nose playing flag football.
That's usually how it is.
It's interesting how that kind of stuff works out.
Yep.
Does your husband still do Tai Chi and yoga and stuff with you?
He does a little bit of Tai Chi still.
Do you guys fight? Tai Chi style?
There's no Tai Chi style fighting. Every once in a while we'll pretend spar, but it's kept pretend sparring for the specific reason that whenever we're even tap sparring, bad things happen. The ongoing thing at our boxing gym is I'm on the shit list because I broke my husband's nose. Because it really was, we would, there were on 2 separate occasions too, we were tap sparring, and I got a little too into it. I also have terrible depth perception, and all of a sudden he's getting an uppercut to the nose, and it was enough to dislodge the cartilage, and then a month later I did it again, and it dislodged it again.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. No one's believing your lies, Abby.
Accidentally. Interestingly enough, whenever I mention that I've accidentally broken my husband's nose, I was like, and he did something to prove to deserve it, didn't he?
80% of domestic abuse is performed by women.
I believe that statistic. I don't need any information to back that data up. But yeah, I mean, we'd still train together. He actually does yoga. He attends one of my classes a week these days, primarily because now I teach yoga at where he works. So it's very easy for him to now take yoga where I'm teaching it.
Oh, that's cool. Where does he work?
He works at BAE Systems.
Oh, fancy.
Very fancy talk.
And we just traveled into territory that I have know nothing about.
It's all good. Me neither.
How have you... So you kickbox. You've been kickboxing for about 2 years? Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on competing?
I've thought about that, especially when I would notice, just the improvements in how I was throwing punches, improvements in how, my overall form would be. And my coach even mentioned that, hey, you're getting to the level that you could start competing. The next step is to be okay with getting hit. And that's where I falter. And to this day, and it actually goes back now to that wonderful mindset attitude. Can I be mentally tough enough to not completely crumble once, I get the tiniest little injury? And right now that's definitely where I am. Like, it could be something as simple as I jam my big toe in a kick and I'll just be like, I'm rethinking this fight. Can we hug it out instead? Let's talk this over. I completely snap out of whatever beast mode I need to be in to fight. And who knows, I might like to compete someday. That would involve also a lot more training than I currently do. 1 or 2 classes a week is not enough to properly compete and not get your butt kicked.
Would you say that comes back to a confidence issue?
It might be. It's that attitude that I am not bigger than getting punched in the face. I think in the end it's really just kind of rewiring where beast mode comes from. If it's just this full on not blind rage, but almost caveman like limbic system.
And I'm sure breaking your husband's nose was an accident.
Yes, again.
I would just like to reiterate that breaking your husband's nose was an accident.
Whoops. And to be fair, it really was, and I felt so terrible, and I think that's part of the reason why I don't spar as much as I do these days, because I'm like, oh man, if I'm not careful, I can hurt the people that I'm in front of, and not, the competing style type of hurting, but like legitimate, we're tap sparring, and now I've really given you a solid punch. But it really is, given how quickly that mindset can break for me, like all it takes is one land hit or kick, and all of a sudden I'm like, I don't know, let's talk this out. It really has got to rewire that, and that might actually have its core in that self-confidence and self-esteem that I'm bigger than the beast mode, essentially.
So a lot of, I think, yoga and tai chi people are kind of known for their wacky diets. A lot of kale or whatever it is. I'm not even sure how to make fun of them because it's all very confusing to me.
They're quinoa. I don't even know what.
What does your diet look like as someone who's been kind of in the game for a long time?
Inconsistent. That's definitely what it is. There's that that meme on Facebook that's like, some days I eat like a vegetarian yoga enthusiast. The other days it's like a kid who got locked in a candy store. There's very little in between. And that's really where I am, where some days it's really focused, where it's, I'll have, some type of like fruit smoothie in the morning and have something that has lots of quinoa and beans and avocado and, and kale. And then other days it's like, where's the pizza? And there are some days where I'll start off with the kale smoothies and the, brush my teeth with quinoa. And by the end of the day, it's like greasy, cheesy, greasy, give me all of that. Which makes me, in some ways, a terrible yogi, in other ways, a great yogi, because I accept that as my personality and as just who I am.
Do you take time out of every day to meditate also?
I try my best to. It can be really easy when I'm teaching class, because, there is a time where there's 10 minutes that everyone's laying down and they're quiet, and that can give me a moment to at least have 5 minutes to sit and just, meditate. I try every morning to at least give myself a minute or two to sit still and just let the mind do what it needs to do. Ideally, it would be way longer than that. Ideally, I would be doing, like these full-on 15, 20-minute meditation practices every day, but it seems like every time I try to get that into my daily routine, it collapses in on itself. So I've learned to find it where I can and then build up.
In talking to people, I've found that there's two types of meditators. There's the super traditional, have to sit on a special pillow and burn special incense and om to yourself the whole time. And then there's the person who says that they can, I'll go ahead and call them the lazy person, that says that they can meditate while they're sitting anywhere doing anything. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
I'm probably on the lazy end-ish. It's actually very fascinating. The lazy one is actually very Buddhist. Kind of like, okay, wherever I am, whatever's going on, take a moment to just be. And actually the Buddhist way, the more passive way is, if the mind's bouncing around, whatever, let the mind bounce around. If I'm focusing on outside noises, well, for now I'm just focusing on outside noises. I know sometimes I can be on the other end, and has absolutely nothing to do with discipline or ritual. It has everything to do with setting parameters. Like sometimes, again, going all the way back to mindset, sometimes it's like, okay, here's a spot I can sit at, and here's this thing I can do to prepare myself mentally to sit in one spot for a few minutes. And then usually that falls by the wayside and I become a lazy person again.
How have combat sports kind of affected? you're a writer.
Yes.
You've been on Huffington Post and the infamous BuzzFeed.
That's correct.
You've written lists. You've written a couple lists.
I've paired words with GIFs.
You've also written 2 books. Mm-hmm. What are the names of your books?
Chick Lit and Other Formulas for Life, and I'm just here for the free scrutiny.
And would you say that your combat sports and your tai chi and your yoga, have those affected your writing positively, or vice versa?
Big time. I mean, especially yoga, where it's all about being true to yourself. I mean, I think writers collapse in on themselves when they're so busy worried about their audience and so busy worried about being liked or being regarded as a good writer that they actually ironically become really shitty writers. So learning also to to take the time to process, because that's yoga for you. You do all this movement and then you're still for 10 minutes to process. I'd say has helped me out as a writer tremendously. And vice versa. I know my exercises and my practices with writing make me a better teacher. It makes me, I still stumble over my verbal words way more than I do if I just have a chance to write them out.
She's actually reading off of a note card
right now. It sounds like I'm making this stuff on the spot, but actually I've got I've got basically War and Peace in front of me and I'm just reading it page for page. But, being able to get into the practice of articulating myself in words on paper makes it easier to articulate what I want to say to my students in the classes.
What are your 2 books about?
Well, I'm just here for the free scrutiny, which is my first one. It's a little ebook that I published through this website called Thought Catalog.
It's a great title. Sounds like going home for the holidays.
Basically, or going to casting calls, which is actually where it gets its name from. It's these collection of just anecdotes from my time as a commercial model, and a lot of them are really just bizarro because that industry is bizarre in and of itself. I mean, you're basically getting paid to have people take pictures of you in very false situations in order to sell stuff. I mean, it doesn't get crazier than that. It does, but it is pretty crazy. And the title came from after a terrible casting call. They actually had made note about how big and muscular my legs were, and it made me feel like I was, basically 1 foot tall. And ironically enough, as I'm leaving, someone was asking me, "Oh, is this where the casting? Are you here for the casting?" And in my mind, I'm going, "No, I'm just here for the free scrutiny."
It's amazing how I'm sure that the people standing behind the counter were a bunch of fat people, fat pigs judging you for your strong legs.
Ironically, it's usually the people tend to be very come in all shapes and sizes, and ironically they then turn to these very tall svelte girls and pick at them for like an inch change in their measurements. It's amazing. But yeah, that book's all about all these like really wacko things that happened when I was a model. Chick Lit and Other Formulas for Life is a fiction novel, and I like to say it's Scream without all the blood, or with less blood, I should say, less murdering. The idea, it's kind of a coming of age tale. The girl's, this 24-year-old out of college, realizing she's doing nothing with her life. And, she works at this bookstore that she's worked at since she was like 17. And she has this disdain for the chick literature, which, is really formulaic. Like, anyone who's never read chick lit before, all you have to do is turn to rom-coms, romantic comedies, see how formulaic they
You're
are.
talking in science right now. No, we lost everybody. My parents are really confused since they're the only ones listening.
Well, it basically follows this horrible formula, where it's just like you can predict the outcome before you even step foot in the movie theater.
What is chick lit?
It's those beach reads, those not even romance novels. Romance is a completely different genre in and of itself, but it's those, the girl meets a guy at a coffee shop or this girl.
Like The Notebook.
Like The Notebook. Notebook is a great example of chick literature. Anything Nicholas Sparks writes is chick literature. It's probably chick literature at its worst.
Or best.
Or best,
depending upon how you view chick literature.
That's true. If it embodies it in some ways, it's kind of the best of it. it's really formulaic, and it's completely unrealistic. No one's lives actually work this way, and she has this complete disdain for it. At the bookstore, all she does is make fun of it. Ironically enough, things in her life start mimicking the world of chick lit. She meets the square-jawed hunk at the coffee shop. She has the best guy friend who's not so secretly in love with her, which is such a staple of romantic comedies, and usually, or in chick lit, and usually when that happens, when the best guy friend who's like secretly in love with his the main character, usually they end up being the perfect match. And so as the book goes on, and she's trying to figure out her life, and in some ways her life's also unraveling on her. There is that moment where she's like, well, maybe I should follow this, these chick lit tropes, and maybe my guy friend is my best, the best option for me. And what happens next? Well, you'll just have to read the book and find out.
I hope it goes down in flames, just because I feel like that would be the best ending.
Oh, yeah. I mean, cover the ears for any person who would actually want to find out this story, but yeah, like, there's a reason why that typically doesn't really go well.
So, one thing I was thinking about when preparing this podcast was, it's got to be hard to be a female in the traditional martial arts world. I know that, recently it's probably gotten a lot easier, but I think that there's still kind of that ingrained male-only idea of martial arts, especially in the traditional martial arts, less so in, mixed martial arts and in the more Americanized version, but in something like Tai Chi, where I feel like it would probably be a lot more difficult to be a female in that kind of world.
It is. I mean, I've been incredibly blessed with the fact that my main instructors are all female, so that helps shapes things tremendously.
Maybe I was completely wrong.
But no, my Tai Chi instructor, born, raised, trained in China, which, I mean, if you're talking about traditional gender roles, you're going to find a lot of examples of that. And unfortunately for her, because she was a woman, she was incredibly limited in the type of training she could get. Her own instructor was actually a Shaolin martial artist, and she wanted to be someone who trained as a Shaolin monk, and but that's a boys' club by every definition, like men only, and so she couldn't even train at she had to train outside of the Shaolin temple. She couldn't learn certain things like say the push hands that I'd mentioned, because tradition says that unless that guy is your husband, unless that guy is related to you, you don't touch her, and her own trainer upheld that tradition, and so any combat-related training she really didn't get, because that would involve, basically touching each other. And then there's also just kind of the idea of the respect that the outside world gives, and in return the self-respect as you take in the outside world. I just look at Tai Chi is enough of a fringe activity that you can have an open mind about it. But all you have to do is look at the early days of women in MMA, women in boxing, the supreme lack of respect they would get, how quickly people would start talking about how sexy they were, or how they should, fight naked and, charge people like it's porn.
That sounds like a terrible idea.
Right? Especially like...
That's disgusting.
Right. I mean, especially given the types of people, the types of women who actually fight, there's really actually nothing sexy about it. Like watching Amanda Nunes beat the crap out of somebody, like, okay, if you're into that, sure, but I don't think her taking her clothes off will suddenly be like, let's give this a triple X.
If you're already into that, nothing's going to make it better.
There we go. Exactly. But it is tough. It's just like any athletic endeavor. It's still this attitude of this is for guys, and if girls are doing it, it's a hobby. And it takes a lot. It's that twice as much effort for half as much recognition. And that can be, really frustrating when I hear people look at boxers or MMA fighters and they get on the female ones for lack of form. And like, oh, look at that. They're so, they're not precise. They're sloppy. And I'll actually watch them objectively, and they're no different than their male counterparts. And in fact, depending on the weight class, they're more precise than their male counterparts. It's just people go in with this mindset of woman is outside or woman has no business being in here. So they're almost looking for any opportunity to invalidate them.
I feel like recently there's been probably more acceptance of females in MMA than there has been in... I mean, there's only been female MMA for so long, for a short amount of time, but I think that females get just as much respect as their male counterparts in the MMA world. Mm-hmm. Do you feel differently?
Oh, no,
Because you just kind of sounded like you thought that they were kind of getting the short end of the stick.
For a while they were. I mean, especially, like, I'd say 2008, in the days of Gina Carano, it was really hard for anyone to give female MMA the respect it deserved. And, I mean, people can say what they want about Ronda Rousey, but she really tore the walls down and forced people to pay attention and forced people to go, oh, wait a minute, women can be athletes. And I really applaud the world of MMA because it's the only sport I can think of where women will compete alongside the guys. It's not like, oh, here's, men's MMA at UFC and tomorrow night will be the women's UFC. It's everything's together. And I think like the most this thing that happened recently for me gives me the most hope in terms of the equality that we're starting to see, where there was a female fighter whose sports bra got shifted on her in the middle of a fight, exposed her, and I think before the people in charge of the cameras knew what they were doing when they did the replay where her sports bra shifted, and the reaction was not the reaction you would have expected. You could almost expect it to be this, oh, nip slip, haha, like super hypersexual, misogynistic commentary. But instead it was about, man, the UFC fight kits are really flimsy, and why would anyone ever purchase these if they can't even like cover up the fighters? I heard debates on when it comes to fighters' sports bras over rash guards. People getting really pissed off at the camera people for not catching that, and finding different angles, and it really was just about the fighter herself. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is a sign that everything is changing. People's mindsets are changing.
How do you feel about fighters like Fallon Fox, who are trans fighters who are fighting as females, coming from a male?
Oh, yeah, that's a tricky world.
I just threw her a curveball. This is not... I just thought of that off the top of my head.
Now we're getting to the heavy-hitty questions.
I'm going to try and make her look like a racist before we leave.
Now we're getting into the heavy-hitty questions. And that's actually something I was thinking about for years now, ever since Fallon Fox wanted to fight in the UFC and Dana White was like, over my dead body. I mean, it's fascinating because the transition, the chemical makeup of a male body, even if you identify as a female, chemically speaking, you have a male body, you have testosterone running through you at a higher level than women do. On the flip side, once you start transitioning and you start taking the hormone supplements, you do lose that testosterone, you do lose body form. You do start to get more of a woman's body. And I think for me, I say, first off, the jury, only time's really going to tell in terms from chemical standpoint, like really what's going on. I mean, some women naturally have more testosterone, and they're naturally going to be better fighters, they're going to be better athletes, and they were born women and identify as women. I guess my feeling on the matter is if the fighter in front of you was born in a guy's body, had that chemical makeup, and you really don't know to what level they're at, and you're in a fighting league where things like hormone supplements are okay, because that's the other thing too. You can't take hormone supplements if you're, say, in the UFC. Like, all you have to do is look at the Chael Sonnens of the world. Like, that's not allowed anymore. You don't get to do that stuff. So if you're in a league where that's allowed, and the fighter has that chemical makeup going on, and you're really not sure where they are, and you sign on anyways, more power to you. On the flip side, if you've got a fighter who knows that about their opponent and goes, you know what, I'm not comfortable with it, I think at the same time, not penalizing a fighter for potentially backing away from a fight from someone who was born a male, they shouldn't be penalized for that.
At some point, that's going to have to come to a head.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if if there's a transgender fighter who's going and she's the next shot at the top, then it would be hard to turn away from that. It would be hard to deny her that opportunity if everybody else is giving her that chance.
That is true.
And then when she reaches the top, will she ever be seen as an actual champion?
And I definitely do not, I can't even pretend that I've got the answer for that. I think a lot of people get themselves into not just trouble saying something that people will cast judgment on, but trouble in terms of not expanding their thinking by going, hey, this is an ambiguous gray zone. Let me immediately decipher whether or not it looks more black or looks more white.
Told you I would make her sound like a racist.
Oh, I knew it. I got backed into a corner. I think that's going to be a time's going to tell type of situation, and I really don't have the answer on that one.
All right. Well, it's been an hour. Abby, thank you very much for coming down and talking with me. Where can people reach you at?
They can reach me primarily at abbyroseyoga.com. I'm also on Facebook, both as Abby Rose Yoga and Abby Rosmarin, which is my writing page. And you can also catch me on Twitter at That Abby Rose.
Awesome. Thank you very much for checking us out today, guys. And you can reach me at either jaggediron.wordpress.com, or you can find me on Facebook under Jagged Iron Strength and Conditioning. Hope you guys have a great week, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks.